By the time the rook slid across the board and clicked into its square, the king was trapped against a skyline of glass. Sebastian Hale's smile cracked a hairline fracture. The reflection in the penthouse window showed a man who'd never once felt cornered, suddenly very, very still. Across from him sat a girl in borrowed sneakers and a hand-me-down hoodie, her fingertips trembling not with fear, but with the thrill of seeing a plan bloom exactly as she had imagined. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to your heart, feel free to share where you're reading from. It's always beautiful to see how far stories like this can travel. Enjoy the story. Chapter 1, Lemon Oil and Lightning in the Mornings. Naomi Cole moved as if she were made of two people, one that knew the path to survival by heart and another that remembered music. She could hum a blues line so softly the neighbors never heard, yet it would lift the weight on her chest for the length of a verse. She rose before 6 to catch the BXM bus, musty and steady through the city's edges, and she tried not to do the math of hours worked versus bills due. The city loved to keep a running tab on the backs of those who cleaned it. Still, she showed up. She wore white so crisp you could fold it into angles like origami. She kept her hair tucked under a scarf while scrubbing tile in places where the tile cost more than anything she owned. It was work, and she did it well. That mattered more than what it was called. On the 34th floor of a tower that pierced the clouds, Naomi wiped lemon oil along the spines of books she would never have time to read. She pressed mop and polish into a floor where white light spilled like water. She moved past shelves of art glass and a grand piano whose keys she had never heard. Imani, her daughter, did her homework at the little marble island where the staff was allowed to sit during breaks. She scribbled algebra with a mechanical pencil that clicked in rhythm. Her backpack had a chessboard wedged inside, soft green and white squares rolled tight like a map. There were as many pencil marks on her fingers as there were stars reflected on the floor. "Baby," Naomi said, more prayer than question. "You done with the equations Mr. Ortiz gave you?" "Almost." Imani's braids brushed her cheek as she peered at the problem. "They make it harder. They make it interesting." She grinned without looking up. "You think Mr. Hale would notice if I played on that board just once?" She meant the one in the corner of the library, ebony and ivory squares lacquered like piano keys, and chess pieces that gleamed even in the gray light of rain. "You mind your place and your time, girl," Naomi said, though the warning was tender. What did Daddy always say? Imani's grin softened into something else. "Don't play until you mean it, otherwise you just moving wood around," Naomi nodded. "And that you already smarter than me." "Not smarter," Imani said, serious, "just sideways different." It had been their little joke before jokes turned into memories. When Imani was 6, a scaffolding had come down in a storm on a site where her father, Andre, was pouring concrete. Someone had cut corners and then cut their phones. A brown man's life became a line item, and a family's grief became an echo. At 12, Imani still felt Andre beside her when she sat at board. He had worked nights and taken classes in the day back when he believed he could be an architect. He taught his daughter chess on a stained set whose queen had a chipped crown. The first lesson was not how the pieces moved, but why nights were the weird ones. They moved in Elquotes because life does too. When she blundered, he'd grin and say, "Every mistake costs you something. Learn to ask it what it cost." Naomi wiped her cloth out and smelled lemon and the faintest trace of something like hope. She had taken the job at Hale Heights because it paid $2 more an hour, and because there was a shuttle she could take with the other staff up to that floating palace. She didn't care that Sebastian Hale was in the news every week for philanthropy, or that he owned a slice of companies most people only read about. She cared that her daughter had bus fare and a good pair of sneakers. She did not care it was a penthouse. She cared that it had heat. "Miss Cole," that was Mrs. Rosen from the downstairs office, a voice like old paper. "Mr. Hale will be hosting a small gathering this evening. We'll need everything perfectly in order." "It always is," Naomi said. Mrs. Rosen looked at Imani, smiled kindly against thin lips. "You're welcome to wait in the staff break room later, sweetheart." Imani nodded, polite. But when Naomi was vacuuming the hallway, she looked up to see her daughter drawn as if by magnet toward the chessboard in the library. The board was set mid-game, as if two ghosts had been called away during battle. The white army looked poised to sack the city. The black pieces sat coiled with possibilities. Imani stopped at the edge of the carpet and didn't move another inch. "You can look," Naomi said. "Just don't touch." "Mom." Imani's voice had the reverence of a museum. You know how sometimes when you see a map, you think about the places. I see this and I think about the roads the pieces could take, even if they haven't yet. Naomi didn't pretend to understand what roads looked like inside her daughter's head, only that she was always halfway there. They finished their day and prepared to leave when the elevator opened, and the man himself stepped out with the sort of ease that made elevators seem designed for him alone. Sebastian Hale was younger than the paper had made him. 47, maybe, and fit in the way of someone who paid people to keep them that way. A hair or two at his temple had turned silver that year, and it looked good on him, honest in a face that had learned to lie for a living and then unlearned it for philanthropy. He wore a suit that refracted the lights and shoes that didn't make a sound. Naomi, he said, looking right at her. He knew the names of people who worked for him because once it had been a trick he learned. It kept unions calm and gossip kinder, but these days it felt like a penance. How are you? Fine, Mr. Hale. And this must be your daughter. He pivoted, smile softer. I'm Sebastian. Imani nodded, holding his gaze with a steadiness that startled Naomi and made her proud. Nice to meet you, sir. What's your name, Imani? Ah, Faith. He touched his chest in the old-school way of someone raised by Southern women with stern kindness. What grade? 6th, sir. Do you play? He gestured to the board. He meant chess. Imani opened her mouth and then closed it, looking at her mother. Always mind your mother's rules, he said gently. But might I ask one game, just for fun? 7 minutes on the clock. I've got to learn to slow down. My advisors keep telling me. He's trying to win something, Naomi told her daughter with a faux sternness, as if the fancy rug had become their kitchen floor. But she nodded. You can play one, baby, and you say thank you. Thank you, Imani said. They took seats in the soft leather chairs that looked out over the river. The dying light turned the glass a deeper blue. Sebastian folded his cuffs and rolled them to his forearm, and there was a woven bracelet there, worn thin. Imani spared a glance at all this, then at the board. You'd like white. He said, offering. Imani looked at the white army as a sculptor might study marble and shook her head. Black, she said softly. I like to listen first. Suit yourself, Sebastian said, surprised. He moved a white pawn forward. She responded with a pawn to the center that met his with a challenge. They fell into a rhythm, and the clock made that gentle talk that slowly turns into a heartbeat. Sebastian had always been good at chess the way he had been good at calculus and investment and courtship, as if it were his to command. He had learned from his father in a kitchen that smelled like coffee and metal filings, and then in college, he had learned to weaponize patience. He didn't play much anymore because so few people knew the game truly, and the ones who did were either too arrogant or too enamored with him to enjoy it. He expected to carve Imani into a story he could tell later, a bright girl, yes, a sweet prodigy, how lovely. He did not expect to feel his focus sharpen, his breath settle, the way it did when an opponent had something he needed to understand. He castled early. She fianchettoed a bishop and then tucked her king away, her pieces flowing into squares he had not quite predicted. He tried to keep tempo, nudging pieces into classical positions and waiting for her to overreach. She did not. He reached for his queen with a plan to harass. She slid a knight to a c3-like square that turned his plan into something else. You see it, Mr. Hale. Her voice was small, but there was a smile in it. He saw. The fork was 2 moves deep, disguised in a quiet move that had looked like a child's sideways step. He frowned at the board, and for the first time in 20 minutes, he stopped thinking about the river or the speech he'd give on homelessness, or the way a board member had smiled a little too long at his speechwriter. He leaned forward. You play well, he said, and meant it. Thank you, she said, and reached for her rook. He tried to simplify, to trade down into something his experience could manage. She let him take a rook and then trapped his queen. He realized it only as her piece clicked into place with a soft glow of triumph. He laughed then, not fake, and shook his head. Well, I'll be damned. Naomi barked a warning to his cussing like she did for men on ladders, almost apologizing with her eyes. He grimaced sheepish. Pardon? They played on, but there was a moment now where he knew he was playing to survive rather than win. When he made a last attempt to build a fortress, she ignored his plea and brought the other rook to the open file. It was not just the beauty of the move, but the confidence of it. The end came swift. A rook slid as if gravity had been reversed, and suddenly his king had nowhere to go. When the clock ticked down, Imani whispered, "Checkmate." He found himself grinning like a boy. You hustled me, Imani, she shook her head. No, sir, I listened to the board. Naomi swallowed. The room had shrunk and grown at once, as if a lung had filled. She looked at her daughter and felt, beneath the rain of worry and fatigue, a sun break through. Sebastian was less moved than he was intrigued. He flicked his eyes toward the city, making the mental ledger people of his kind always keep: investment, return, risk. He had been searching for a million abstract things: purpose, distraction, a justification, and here, in a child with serious eyes, was something terrifyingly concrete. "One more?" he asked. Naomi cleared her throat. "Sorry, Mr. Hale, my daughter's got homework." He looked between them and saw the rule written in Naomi's spine. It was not a rule he could buy his way past, and yet, of course, he glanced down at Imani and something like warmth threaded through calculation. "Another time then, if you'd like it." Imani hesitated, looked at her mother. Naomi nodded once. "Sure," Imani said. "Another time." Chapter 2. Wolves in suits and ghosts at doors. Sebastian forgot, after his guests came and went, to show them the rooftop garden he'd paid for with too much green. He stood on the edge of his own party and watched people laugh in the way a man looks at a painting of a harbor after a shipwreck. He smiled where he needed to and shook hands that held other people's hands in them, and all the while that rook sliding into place replayed in his mind like a small, bright catastrophe. He had been married once to a woman who studied words the way mathematicians study numbers. They had a daughter who built Lego towers with brutal precision and then loved to knock them down. When Nora died at 7, their marriage cracked open like ice in March. They grieved differently. He tried to fix grief, and she tried to understand it. Eventually, he put all his fixing into something else: his company's pivot to 1,000 philanthropic arms, a foundation that supported innovation and access, the two magic words that opened any door in any city. Innovation was money dressed up in a lab coat. Access was a business model. He made a fortune early buying into systems other men designed, and he became the man who designed them. He invested in green energy and made more money. He bought a chain of succession plans and learned that the only difference between a charity and a corporation was the font. There was a hunger he couldn't name that came for him nights he didn't sleep. He sat on leather and drank scotch poured into glass that had never been held by a dishwasher, and wondered if there was any way to move now that he had hemmed himself in with consequence. He thought about how chess saved men who were bored and saved men who were trapped. He thought about a 12-year-old girl who didn't need saving. He called Dina from the kitchen, finally tasting his drink. "Don't ask why," he said. "Find me the best chess coach in the city who has a heart and not just a rating." "You trust me to find the best heart," Dina teased. "I trust you to recognize one even if it's attached to a terrible brand." He paused. "And find me out if there's an IM named Aisha Okonkwo still living in New York, or if she went back to Lagos." "On it," Dina said. "You surprise me sometimes, boss." "I surprise myself all the time," he said, and meant it. "Oh, and reach out to Miss Cole. I'd like to speak with her about her daughter." MMM. Dina made a sound that was not a warning. "Careful with people who don't owe you anything, Sebastian." "Exactly why I care," he said. Meanwhile, Naomi was on the bus, watching Imani sleep with her head on Naomi's shoulder. The bus wheezed past laundromats and storefront churches and a bodega where the owner always called Naomi family because they had become so, in the way of city strangers who watch each other survive. She kissed her daughter's temple and smelled rain. Imani woke halfway to real sleep to whisper, "Mom, did I mess up by saying yes?" Naomi laughed softly. "Baby, you checkmated a billionaire. The only mistake you made was not asking him for my raise." Imani smiled, then bit her lip. "Would you be mad if I wanted to go back and play again?" "No," Naomi said. Truth, she did not know the answer until she said it. "But I'd be mad if you forgot who you are while you were there." "Who am I?" The bus light streaked across Imani's face, making little films of her features. "My daughter," Naomi said. "Andre's child. It was a spell. And yourself." "Sometimes I think if I look hard enough, I can see Daddy's moves before I make them," Imani whispered. "Is that stupid?" "No," Naomi's voice tightened. "That's love." Chapter 3. Contracts on coffee-stained paper. Dina found Aisha Okonkwo in a Brooklyn cafe where the coffee tasted like ambition and the tables were scarred with cup ring circles. Aisha wore a headwrap that matched nothing and everything, and when she moved, something in the air moved back with her. Her laugh was a rope ladder. She had been a prodigy once and then a woman always. She knew the taste of rooms that didn't want to seat her and men who smiled too wide because they needed to be told they were good. She knew about becoming I am in a vacuum that insisted she didn't exist. She knew how to teach because she learned in a country of aunties who taught everything, music, math, manners, for the price of love. Mr. Hale, she said, smiling the way some doctors do when they know your wound better than you do. You play. Used to, he said. You're the one plays now. I teach, she corrected gently. Sometimes that's the same thing. He nodded, meeting the energy of someone who didn't care for his percentage. I met a girl, he began, and Aisha lifted a hand in the universal sign for caution. You find a child with talent and you want to turn it into a project. I know, they always do. Question is, what you going to do when she doesn't need you, or when she does and you can't fix it? Sebastian put up both hands. Fair. Who is she? Her name is Imani, he said. Her mother cleans my place. Aisha's eyes narrowed, then softened. I know this story, she said. Sometimes it goes good. Sometimes it goes raw. Bring them. When Naomi and Imani met Aisha, the teacher's gaze settled on the girl the way light settles on water. Show me, she said, not even hello yet. Play. Imani played. Aisha watched both the board and the places that weren't on it. You think in shapes, Aisha murmured, delight in her voice. You feel squares like their notes. Who taught you? My dad, Imani said. He died. My mom lets me play so I won't feel like dying too. Naomi flinched and then smiled at her daughter. Too honest, she said to Aisha, not apologizing. Good, Aisha said. That's the only way this will work. She looked to Naomi. Do you want this? Naomi looked at her hands. I want my child to have any door that this city would lock mean in her face. Aisha nodded. Okay, she said. Mr. Hale, step back. He blinked. Pardon. This is between women, Aisha said. You can sponsor, you can fund, you can use your name to open doors that should never have been shut, but you cannot be in the room where this girl learns how to lose and win. You cannot be in the room where she cries when she realizes none of this is fair, and you cannot be in the room where she gets good to the point she scares men. You hear me? Sebastian breathed out. He didn't know whether to be amused or grateful or both. He put his hands in his pockets. Yes, ma'am. They made a plan on coffee-stained napkins because sometimes napkins are stronger than contract paper. Aisha would coach Imani 3 afternoons a week. Naomi would bring her to the Brooklyn Library where Aisha held court among free programs and donated boards. Sebastian would cover the tournament entries, the travel, the hotel rooms for out-of-town meets, the joy of a good breakfast when the nerves were too loud. There would be a contract, there had to be, but Naomi insisted on clauses that made Dina's eyebrows climb. No use of Imani's image for promotion without explicit consent. No strings on school choice. No control over interviews or the right to tell their story. No ownership of the story at all. Naomi was precise, with a pen she had borrowed from a banker cousin who worked in a cubicle that stared inward at other cubicles. Dina read the draft and lifted her gaze to Sebastian. You should have Naomi negotiate all our deals. Tempting, he said. Draw it up, exactly like that. Really? Dina was surprised. Really, he said, and something in his chest lightened as if turning down a lever. Then there's one last thing, Naomi said. No press, she's 12, she's not a headline. No press, Dina echoed. Of course there was press. Chapter 4, the first tournament the auditorium smelled like pizza and floor wax and something else, the thin metal scent of adolescent ambition. Folding tables lined up in rows like a cemetery. There were homemade boards and boards that gleamed. There were parents with clipboards and parents with hope. There were children who wore hoodies and children who wore suits that didn't fit. There was a hum like a stadium before a kickoff. Imani's fingers tightened on her backpack straps. You belong, Aisha whispered in her ear. Not because he paid, not because she cleans, because you play. Imani nodded, and the nerves went into their locker. Her first opponent was a boy who wouldn't shake her hand until the TD made him. He didn't look at her, only at her dark skin and the hair beads that clicked when she tilted her head. She studied the board like a detective who had already solved the case and was now just checking her math. He opened with something crisp he had memorized. She answered with something she had absorbed like a song. He fell into her rhythm without knowing it, and then he fell off a cliff of his own making. When he realized, his eyes lifted to hers and she wanted to forgive him. She did not here. She won in 29 moves and whispered, "Good game." He muttered something. She didn't catch it. She didn't need to. Between rounds, she ate a banana with Aisha and practiced a tactic on a battered travel set. Naomi sat nearby with a notebook, writing down logistics and whispers and the way her daughter's shoulders were loose when she was happy. After the second win, an organizer came to ask if she could tell a local reporter about this marvelous story. No, Naomi said before the woman finished. Thank you. The third round was a loss. The boy was older, with a nervous twitch in his cheek and a good memory. He tricked her in a line she had not seen, and her knight ended up on a square where it could do nothing but watch her lose. She walked away with Aisha's hand at her back and let herself feel the weight of it. It's heavy, she said. Good, Aisha replied. Heavy teaches you where to put your hands. Imani finished the day with 3 wins and 1 loss and placed in the top 10 of her section. Naomi hugged her in a hallway lined with vending machines and whispered, proud, so many times it felt like a new name for her daughter. They celebrated with ice cream at a place where the scoops were too expensive and tasted like childhood's without worry. The next week, she won her section at a different meet. Then she won again, and then the newspapers called. One morning, Naomi took out the trash and found herself on the cover of a tabloid Billionaire bets on Maid's prodigy. There was a photo, taken from God knows where, of Imani stepping into a car that was nicer than the bus. Naomi's stomach turned. She took the paper upstairs and crumpled it before Imani saw. What you throw out? Imani poked her head around the door. Nothing, Naomi lied. Something rotten. Chapter 5, The Storm and the Screenshot. The internet doesn't knock, it breaks windows. Within days, Naomi had a DM from a woman who ran a podcast about talent pipelines and another from a man who wanted to leverage this story for mutual uplift. The foundation's social media team begged Dina to allow them one post. Naomi said no until she was blue, and then she said yes to one photo, a hand over a chess clock, no faces. It still felt like theft. Sebastian told her, we don't have to do this. We can sponsor quietly, we can step back. Naomi looked at him like a man who never had to hide could not understand the luxury of hiding. We can try, she said. But the story doesn't belong to us. He nodded and tried to swallow that truth whole. A week later, a reporter named Paige sent Naomi an email with an attachment. The subject line was sooner or later. Naomi clicked and saw a scan of a public record, OSHA report from a construction accident in Red Hook 6 years prior. 57 pages in shorts and uppercase on letterhead that made her pulse spike. Her eyes ran over the words as if they might melt. The company at the top was not Hale. It was a contractor named Delta Foundation Construction. Her eyes slid down to the 3rd page, where a list of parent companies sat like nested dolls. At the bottom, in italics, Hale Infrastructure and Partners, wholly owned subsidiary. Naomi read it twice, then 3 times, then she put the phone down. She rubbed her temples like she could erase a headache and the past. She called the number listed under Paige's name. Where did you get this? Public record, Paige said. You didn't know. Naomi's laugh was a knife on a plate. No. Our paper's planning a piece on Hale's safety record, Paige continued. We'd like to talk to families affected. We're going to be careful. You're going to be hungry, Naomi said. You're going to eat us. There was a long silence. I'm sorry, the reporter said eventually. That's fair. Naomi hung up and sat in the kitchen chair. The city outside their small window breathed like a thing asleep. She closed her eyes and saw Andre's hands teaching their baby girl how to hold a pawn like it mattered. A Monday later, she walked into the penthouse with the OSHA report printed and folded in her handbag like a letter. She cleaned the kitchen and waited for him to come home. When he did, he knew before she spoke that the day had changed the room. Naomi, he said, careful. He had learned to hear the pitch of danger. Everything all right, did you know? She pulled out the papers as if she were stabbing them onto the island between them. His face paled like heat gone from coffee. Know what? His voice did not fully convince him. That your company owns the company that built the site that killed my husband, she said. The words made a sound when they hit air. Did you know? Sebastian swallowed and looked at the top page, then at her. I didn't, he said, and wished it were true enough not to sound like a lie. He grabbed at the papers, scanning. This must have been one of dozens of Jesus. Don't say his name in here, Naomi said, breath trembling. Not like that. He looked up at her, a helplessness that made him look like a boy who'd just learned a secret about his father. Naomi, I swear to you. Why would your swear matter? She snapped. Do you think I don't know that men like you build shields out of other men's names? You asked my daughter to sit across a board from you, and I said yes because I thought your power could be harnessed. And all the while, she knocked the report. This was under the table. He flinched like a man struck. Give me a day, he said, his voice steady enough to feel like a raft. Please, I'll look into this. I'll get you every document you want. I want truth, Naomi said. I want to know how my daughter is supposed to go back to playing in your house if your house is built on. She couldn't finish. I want to go home. Sebastian nodded. I'll call you tomorrow, he said softly. Don't, she said. Figure it out first, then come to me like a person. He watched her leave, and for the first time in years, the penthouse felt like a mausoleum. Chapter 6. Boardrooms and Battlegrounds. The boardroom at Hale looked out over a different slice of skyline and smelled like money disguised as walnut. 16 people at a polished table, a 12-course meal of excuses before them. Martine, Sebastian said, looking at his CFO. This Red Hook case. Why am I reading about a settlement in a file I didn't sign? She did not blink. Because you hired me to sign what you didn't want to see. He stared. He liked Martine because she was the only person in the building who could say something like that without flinching. You think I didn't want to see it. I think you wanted to see the big picture, she said. So I drew one where the little corners didn't matter. She put her hands flat on the table. We acquired Delta after the incident. It was wrapped in a holding company to isolate risk. The legal team settled with 6 families, NDA all around. There was never a question of your personal exposure. He closed his eyes. There was a question of their lives. Yes, Martine said, and something like apology flickered. There always is. I want the file, he said. Everything. NDA templates, the amounts, the names of every lawyer. You don't, said a man 2 seats down, soft-voiced and dangerous in the way men become when they haven't been corrected in years. Discovery is a problem. Discovery is a word cowards use, Sebastian snapped, suddenly not caring. Bring me the file. The room shifted, the air tightened. Martine sighed. He's right, she said, no longer hiding. You open this, the press will crawl over everything else. We have pending deals, we have donors to consider. I don't think this company should be run if it cannot withstand sunlight, Sebastian said. It's going to be me or the paper that opens the file. I'd like it to be me. Silence softened into grudging obedience. Later, alone in his office, he opened the folders one by one. He saw numbers that made his teeth ache. He saw names. He saw, in a typed letter to a widow, phrases that meant nothing: regret, unprecedented weather event, act of God. And he thought of Naomi's face when she told him not to say that name that way. He found Andre Cole in a table of the dead. He saw the settlement amount the lawyers had negotiated as if it had any relation to a child learning to move pieces on a board to fill a gap. He stood at the window and looked at a city that had crowned him, and for once he felt the weight of the crown crushing the skull. Dina found him like that and didn't ask what he needed. She put her hand on his back and waited. What am I if I was made by this? He asked her. A man who can make something else, she said. He called Naomi and asked to see her, and she said, no. He asked again, and she allowed him half an hour at the library under Aisha's gaze. He sat on a chair too small and stared at the community board that advertised free GED classes and a lecture on tenant rights. He told Naomi everything: the acquisition, the settling, the legal language. He told her what he would do. What can you do? She asked. I can tell the truth, he said. I can pay what should have been paid then. I can set up a fund in their names and make it public. I can open the books I can open. It will cost. Good, Aisha said from the next table, not looking up. Most things worth doing do. He looked at Amani, who stood in the doorway watching, unflinching. I can tell the press not to use your names. I can stop this story. Naomi held his gaze like a woman who had learned to see through claims. You can't stop a story, she said, but you can make sure it isn't the only one. He nodded, and for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving a piece not to save a game but to start a new one. Chapter 7. The year the city turned, he called a press conference and wrote a speech that didn't sound like a speech. He stood in front of a room that had put him on the cover and said words that men with money are not advised to say. We failed, he began. We failed 6 families. We built a wall between our profits and our responsibility, and we called it strategy. We cut a check, and we called it justice. The flashbulbs made the room glitter with false stars. He took off his jacket and rolled up his sleeves and showed his woven bracelet, and there was something human about the gesture he didn't intend as theater. I'm stepping down as chairman of Hale Infrastructure and Partners, effective immediately. We will be releasing records related to the 2019 Red Hook safety incident. We have set aside a fund of $100 million for worker safety and family support in any case where we are found culpable. We will be changing the NDA. We will be apologizing in person. A reporter shouted, "Is this about the chess kid?" And he looked at her like a teacher looks when a student asked a shallow question. This is about the men and women whose names are not headlines, he said. It's about a city that built its towers with hands we pretended were invisible. At home, Naomi watched on a cracked iPad with Aisha and Imani. She did not cry at the apology. She cried when he said, "We failed," because the pronoun spoke to something she had learned to stop hoping for, that the guilty could be a collective and not just a ghost. The weeks that followed were a storm. The foundation's donors called with concern and then with admiration. His board split into camps like a map of islands. Lawyers raged and then wrote new clauses. Paige the reporter wrote a story that was both scathing and strangely tender, and the city, for a single day, remembered the names of 6 men, and one of them was Andre. Imani kept playing. She lost the state final in a game that would later be posted online and watched by 500,000. She had mixed an opening and a middle game like a baker who misreads, but makes something new. The girl who beat her was 15 and raw and incredibly gentle afterward. "You're fire," she whispered to Imani in the hallway. "You're going to burn me next year." Imani took a breath and tasted smoke and sugar. At school, a boy asked her if she was famous. "No," she said, "but maybe my mistakes are." At home, a stack of mail grew. Some of it was hate, coded and not. Some of it was love and hope from strangers who wanted to buy her a board or a book or a breakfast. A note came from a woman in Detroit. "When my son died, I thought the world ended. Your daughter reminds me the world is a chessboard. Pieces lost do not mean the game cannot be won." Naomi taped that one to their fridge. Chapter 8, the letter in the book. Before his accident, Andre had sketched buildings on napkins and receipts. He would show Naomi his newest and say, "Look, baby, look how this one holds weight." After he died, Naomi found a small box inside a bigger box of keepsakes, inside a folded paper. She had been afraid to open it. It sat under the bed for 6 years like a heartbeat under floorboards. On a day when the world had been too loud, Naomi pulled the box out. She called Imani to her side, and together they unfolded the paper. It wasn't one letter, it was many. Andre had written little messages on the backs of chess puzzles he had copied by hand. If you ever miss me, make a plan. Plans build bridges you can walk on. Roman 2, if you ever feel like you can't breathe, pretend you're a pawn that reached the end of the board. What did you want to become? Roman 3, you are not a piece, baby. You are the player. Don't let anyone pin you without your permission. Roman 4, if a man with money offers to move a piece for you, watch his hands. Are they yours? No, so watch his eyes. V, when you meet a person who wants the game to be fair, treat them like a bishop, diagonal, surprising, sanctified. VI, don't forget to eat breakfast. Imani laughed, then cried, then laughed. He knew everything. He didn't, Naomi said softly. But he knew you. They kept one note in Imani's pocket at tournaments, a talisman against noise. Chapter 9, the Nationals. It was rainy in Nashville, which made no sense to Imani. The hotel smelled like too many people indoors, and the carpet had a pattern designed to confuse. On the first day, she slept badly because the air conditioning hummed in a register just sharp enough to unsettle. She ate oatmeal because Rule VI. The hall where they played was larger than any she'd been in before. There was a stage at the end for winners, which Aisha called a distraction. There were dozens of coaches, some of them looking at their phones while their kids learned to breathe underwater. Imani felt her nerves start to fray. Information that normally tuckered itself neatly into her brain came rattling in. She looked at Aisha and Naomi and saw only love, which was too big to hold and not helpful in a time control. "Come," Aisha said and took her to a corner by a window. "Close your eyes." Imani did. "Where are you?" "At our kitchen table," Imani said. "Daddy is cutting apples into stars with a knife he probably shouldn't be using. Mom tells him it's not professional, and he says, 'You are not my boss at home, woman.' She says, 'I am always your boss,' which is actually true." Aisha smiled. "Now put your hands on a board you can't see." Imani's fingers mimed the pieces on her thighs. "Play not against anyone, against fear." Imani moved an imaginary pawn, then she slid a knight. She exhaled like someone who remembered how. She started the sectional with a scruffy win against a kid who moved too fast. She ended with a loss against a goat-faced boy who made one brilliant move and was a jerk about it, a combination she would learn to respect and avoid. The next day, she saw a backpack with a sticker that read "Girls Matter. Ask me." She smiled and asked the girl wearing it if she wanted to warm up. They played a 15-minute blitz, and the girl, whose name was Alana, also 12, grinned when Imani walked into a trap and said, "Ooh, that will look ugly if someone's watching." Imani grinned back. "No one is." They won and lost and won and lost and ended the day in that perfect state of exhaustion where you don't want sleep because it might erase the magic. Her final opponent was the top seed, a girl from California with cool braids and a calm that made Imani imagine she practiced yoga in a hurricane. Her name was Gia. They sat down with a handshake that felt like a treaty. From the first move, the game felt like one she would be able to remember forever if she won, and even if she lost. They fell into a line Imani had not prepared, a queen's gambit accepted, and then mangled by two minds that wanted to fight. Imani felt the old anxiety skitter. She could bail out into a draw-ish line if she was careful, and all the adults who had never played told you to be careful. But Andre's note was warm in her pocket. Roman 4 and Roman 3. Watch his hands. You are the player. Imani complicated. She threw a pawn forward to break a structure that looked like a wall in a dream. Gia's eyebrows flicked up, then down. Her knight danced. Imani saw an echo of her first game against Mr. Hale, a rook lift, a file that looked empty and then filled with urgency. She could almost see the roads light up. Move 20. Gia pushed a pawn that looked safe and was poison. Imani took with a minor piece and didn't flinch at the gasp from someone watching. It opened a diagonal for a bishop she had placed 15 moves earlier with nothing but faith. She slid her bishop like a blade, and suddenly Gia's queen had no squares. Time ticked in that new way it does when you leave Earth. She trapped the queen. Gia traded material to escape, and suddenly the board was on fire. The final sequence was something you see once a year on the internet. Bishop on a long diagonal cutting a king, rook sliding behind a pawn that has no dreams of queening, a knight that forked air. Imani held the position with the calm of someone who knew the weather, and then, quietly, she made the move. When she said, "Checkmate," it sounded like relief. Gia reached across and shook her hand twice. "That was art," she whispered. Then louder, "Good game." The hall exploded and then contracted. Naomi was there, hugging her and saying her name over and over. Aisha lifted her once, as if she were still small, and then set her down. Sebastian watched from the doorway like a man who didn't know whether to clap. He did not approach. Imani climbed the stage. She thought she would think of the cameras, but instead she thought about the apple stars and the note in her pocket. She didn't look for the lens. She looked at Naomi. When they got back to the hotel, there was a note slid under their door. It was not from a journalist or a fan or a hater, it was from Dina. Just wanted to say, "I watched a girl force a king into a corner today. The last time I saw that, I was in a meeting with a senator. Felt just as good. Eat something. Drink water. Sleep. There's more tomorrow." Chapter 10, Aftermath. The beauty of a brilliancy is it buys you a day. After that, you are still the girl from the Bronx, and your mother still has a shift at dawn, and the bus is still crowded and the rent still comes. But something else happens. The way the bodega owner says your name changes. The way the women at church hold your face between their hands changes. The way the boys at school talk to you becomes a little straighter, a little quieter, because they saw you build a world in 40 moves. The foundation offered to set up a trust in Imani's name. Naomi read every line twice, and then asked Dina to remove 3 clauses and add one that gave Imani power to cut ties with a pen and a sentence. Dina did. Sebastian called sometimes and not others. He went to meetings where men who had been his friends spoke to him like he had stepped on their lawn. He stopped going to parties. He started to teach at a community center on Tuesdays, not chess but money, how to read a paycheck, how to open an account without a minimum that would break you, how to ask a question in a bank without feeling like you had to apologize for taking up room. He did it badly at first, then better, then good enough to keep. One day he asked Naomi if he could visit the cemetery. She considered it, then said yes if she came too. They went on a Wednesday when the city's noise dipped into a kind of lull. They stood by Andre's stone, and Naomi watched Sebastian put his hand on it like he might need to steady himself. He didn't apologize again. He didn't talk to the dead man like a sentimental fool. He stood, as a man does when he doesn't know what to say and doesn't give in to saying something anyway. "Imani beats me every time now," he said, almost smiling. "She always will," Naomi said, and it wasn't mean, it was true. He nodded. "We got the fund set up in Andre's name," he said. "I didn't put my name on it." "Good," Naomi said. "He didn't like your font." He laughed once, a small sound that startled a bird. "Do I get to come watch her play next month?" "You get to buy her breakfast and sit in the back and not tell anyone she's yours," Naomi said. "She isn't," he said, and the words were both a boundary and a prayer. Chapter 11. In Game in Life, there are games people will tell you are zero-sum. Money is one. Love is another. Chess is the closest we have to proof both are sometimes wrong. Imani grew into a girl who treated an opening like a story title and an in-game like an epiphany. She lost ugly and she won ugly, and she did both publicly and without turning into a brand. She did interviews when she wanted. She skipped them when she didn't. She kept her hoodie and her beads because they were not a costume, they were her. She took a train to Philadelphia before dawn to play a man who had insulted her online, and she beat him in 27 and then shook his hand like she was teaching him how to be a person. She traveled to St. Louis and sat in a chair where champions sat and felt smaller and bigger at once. She learned to say no to endorsements that felt like lies. She said yes to a small company that made boards cheap enough for kids to carry in their backpacks. She recorded a video for them in a school library where the lights flickered, and she smiled like a conspirator and said, "Find me after school." 2 o'clock, bring snacks. Aisha watched with the deep pride of a woman who had spent too many afternoons arguing with doors. She sent a postcard to her mother in Lagos that said simply, "Found one." Naomi slept better some nights. Others she didn't, because she worried the world would do what it always did. But when she didn't sleep, she sat at the kitchen table and copied notes from Andre's letter into a new notebook for a girl who would be 13 soon, then 14, then a woman who carried her mother's name wherever she went. Sebastian started dating a woman who worked in city planning and wore boots that could walk anywhere. He learned to listen to her anger without trying to fix it, as if he were listening to a song that needed to be heard all the way to the last note. He went to a grief group and said Nora's name aloud and later sat in a park and cried until it felt like a fever breaking. The press forgot, and then remembered, and then forgot again. The city moved forward like it always does, stumbling and pretending the stumble was part of the dance. The fund in Andre's name paid for funerals and college, and the first months of rent for families who needed to leave apartments that hurt them. Lawyers tried to carve their names into the stone of it. Naomi kept them honest with the sharp, polite voice of a woman who had learned the sound men listened to. One evening, after a game that would later be called the Midsummer Trap, Imani sat at the board in Mr. Hale's library again. The sun bled into the river. She had grown taller and so had her game. She looked up and found him looking at the spot where his daughter used to sit on a stool by the piano. He caught himself and smiled. "You ever think," he asked, "how a game can feel like a place?" "Yes," she said. "Sometimes I think you live there when you can't live here." He nodded and moved a pawn. She looked at him not as a benefactor or a savior or a penitent man, but as an opponent she respected and as a person who had learned to carry weight differently. "Mr. Hale," she said. "Yeah. I want to start a Saturday thing at the library, for girls, a club, nothing fancy. We can talk about openings and how to shake hands and how to make space in rooms that don't have chairs. Will you pay for pizza?" "Yes," he snapped, and then, because he was learning, "If you want me to," she grinned. "I do." He nodded at the board. "Your move." She reached for her knight. "You know what my dad said about knights?" she asked. "Tell me." "They move like life does," she said, and set the L on the board. "Weird on purpose," he laughed. "Weird on purpose, I like that," she shrugged. "Me too." The rook slid to the open file. The clock ticked. The city lights came on one by one as if called by a patient king. Inside the glass walls, a story that could have been a headline became a life. Chapter 12, the unforgettable conclusion years later, in a hall bigger than any room she'd ever seen as a child, Imani played a game that would be named, against her will, after her. Men would analyze it on YouTube and boys would reenact it in cafeterias. Girls would watch it in their bedrooms and cover their mouths at Move 32. She would smile at the name someone gave it, the coal conversion, and privately call it breakfast because she had eaten oatmeal and thought of Rule VI. She won in a way that looked like magic and was not. It was the product of afternoons in libraries, mornings on buses, nights reading books with spines cracked and loved. It was the product of a mother who wrote her clauses and a father who wrote her notes, a coach who told her to listen to the square, and a man who learned to step back. After the trophy and the lights and the cameras, she went outside into the city where air always feels like it belongs to everyone if you wait long enough. Naomi was beside her, and so was Aisha, and so, hovering a step away, was Sebastian. They stood under a slice of sky and did not speak for a while. The city's hum felt like a heartbeat they had learned to share. "What now?" Naomi asked her daughter in the tone that says you choose. "Now," Imani breathed in. "We go home, we sleep, we get up, we eat breakfast, we teach on Saturday. We play again." "That's it?" Sebastian asked, half teasing, half reverent. That's everything, Aisha said. They began to walk. A group of girls in matching hoodies ran after them, breathless. Imani, can we take a picture? One asked, hopeful and braced for no. Imani looked at her mother. Naomi nodded. Okay, Imani said, and kneeled so they didn't have to stand on their toes. After, she put her phone away and turned to Sebastian. Don't post that one, she said. It's ours. He put a hand to his heart. Never. They reached the curb, and the city offered them a cab and a bus and a train and a walk. They chose to walk. The night was warm, and the sidewalks looked like chessboards and boardrooms and dance floors all at once. At an intersection, a man in a suit stepped back to let them pass. He glanced at the trophy and then at Imani, and then at the woman beside her, and then at the man behind them, and he tried to put them into a story that would fit in his head. He failed. Good, Naomi thought, and smiled, small and fierce. They reached their block, and the bodega owner called out, Family. He passed a candy bar to Imani and a quarter to a child playing with chalk on the curb. A girl with braids looked up from her chalk squares and asked, Can you show me how to castle? Tomorrow, Imani said. 2 o'clock, bring snacks. That night, in their apartment that was too small for the love it held, Naomi took out the old folder. She unfolded the last note from Andre, one she had not shown Imani yet because it felt like a blessing or a bruise. She handed it to her daughter. Romans 7, if you ever feel like the world invited you somewhere to watch you fail, remember they don't control the clock, you do. Take your time, breathe, make a move that belongs to you. Imani read it twice, then held it to her chest. He was smart. He loved you, Naomi corrected, as if there was a difference. That's smarter. In a penthouse of glass and light, Sebastian sat at a board alone and moved the pieces into a position he had never understood until now. A draw agreed because both players wanted to keep something alive. He glanced at a picture of Nora on the piano and whispered, Weird on purpose, and felt the words do the work of a prayer. A year after that, the girls' Saturday club grew like a vine. They met at noon. They played and joked and learned to say no with their mouths and their eyes. They went into rooms and spread their chairs like a contagion. They watched each other win and lose. They brought snacks. They built a city where girls with braids and girls with buzz cuts and girls with headscarves could sit and think and laugh and become terrifying in the best way. There were still days the world tried to corner them. On those days, they as a group would lower their heads to the boards and move knights in elquotes, bishops in diagonals, rooks in long, clean lines, making roads where none had been drawn, and they would whisper to each other like a religious thing, We are not pieces. We are players. And if you ever find yourself in a city road at dusk, and you hear laughter like bells and a woman's voice correcting a clause, and the soft talk of a clock counting down on a table that has heard too many stories, know this, somewhere upstairs, behind glass and good intentions, a man learned to be a person. Somewhere downstairs, a mother learned to rest her shoulders a little. And somewhere, always, a child with a chipped queen makes a plan, lifts a rook, and changes the game.